Every morning for 60 years, an 83-year-old woman named Odessa Marsh sat on the porch of her house in Biloxi, Mississippi, at exactly 7 in the morning, and hummed 4 bars of a hymn she couldn't remember the name of, only the tune, taught to her before she was old enough to remember by whom. And every morning, for 60 years, 1,100 miles away in a small town outside Spokane, Washington, an 83-year-old woman named Ruth Calloway sat by her kitchen window at exactly 7 in the morning and hummed the exact same 4 bars, in the exact same key, unable to explain to her children or grandchildren where the tune came from, only that it felt like something she was supposed to remember. Neither woman knew the other existed. The day those 2 women finally stood on the same stage together, having been separated as infants and raised 4 states apart without either family ever learning the other's name, the host of the show they were appearing on had to walk away from the cameras twice before he could finish speaking. Odessa Marsh had come to Family Bond as a guest, not a contestant. The show occasionally featured living history segments, brief interviews with elderly guests about a lifetime of memories, filler content between game rounds that rarely made anyone cry. She wore her church hat, the good one, navy blue, with a small silk flower, and held her granddaughter's hand as she was led to a chair set up near the podiums. Marcus Steele, doing his usual warm introduction, asked her the standard opening question reserved for these segments. "Miss Marsh, tell us something about yourself most people wouldn't guess." She had answered this question the same way for years, at church socials, at her grandchildren's school projects, at every small gathering where someone asked an old woman to say something interesting about her long life. "I was born a twin," she said, "but my sister died at birth. That's what the sisters at the orphanage told my adoptive mother. Anyway, I don't remember any of it, of course. I was only days old." Nobody in the studio noticed the woman standing 3 podiums away, waiting for her own segment, go completely still. But nobody in that studio knew what was about to happen next. Ruth Calloway had also come as a guest for the same living history segment, scheduled to appear later in the same taping. A coincidence of booking that no one on the production staff had thought twice about. 2 elderly guests in one afternoon, back to back, was simply an efficient use of studio time. Ruth had been born in the same Mississippi county Odessa had, 83 years earlier, at a small Catholic maternity home run by an order of nuns who, in the chaos of the post-war years, kept records that were, generously, incomplete. Ruth had grown up believing she was an only child. Her adoptive parents told her plainly, when she was old enough to understand adoption at all, that her birth mother had been unable to keep her and had passed away shortly after. No twin was ever mentioned. Ruth had no reason to imagine one existed. For 60 years, both women had quietly carried small, unexplainable things that neither had ever thought to connect to anything real. Odessa hummed her 4 bars every morning and told her family it was just a habit, I suppose, from somewhere. Ruth did the same, in the same key, at the same hour on the opposite side of the country. Odessa had a small raised birthmark on the inside of her left wrist, shaped, her grandchildren always joked, like a tiny crescent moon. Ruth had the identical mark in the identical place, and had joked about it with her own grandchildren using almost the exact same words, shaped like a little moon, without either family ever comparing notes, because there was no reason on earth either family would have thought to. The system failure that separated them was not cruelty. It was simply the chaos of a maternity home in 1943, run on faith and insufficient paperwork, that separated a set of twins during a difficult birth when one infant was mistakenly recorded as stillborn due to a delayed cry and shallow breathing that the attending sister assumed, in the panic of the moment, meant the child had not survived. The child had survived. She had simply been handed in the confusion, to a different family entirely. One already in the process of an unrelated adoption that same week, and by the time anyone might have corrected the paperwork, both infants had already left the building with two separate families who had no reason to ever meet. There was no villain in this story, only a clerical error 83 years old, and 2 lifetimes spent, separately, without ever knowing what had been taken from each of them. Odessa had asked about her birth family only once, in her 60s, after her adoptive mother passed, and she found a box of old papers. A letter to the Mississippi Vital Records Office in 1998 came back with a form response. Records from that facility prior to 1950 were incomplete or unavailable due to fire damage in 1957. Case closed, in the driest possible language, on a life she never got to have. Both women had raised children of their own who grew up hearing the same phrase, in 2 different households 1,100 miles apart. Every time the subject of their mother's pasts came up, I don't really know much about where I came from. I try not to think about it too hard. A granddaughter of Ruth's later said, in an interview after the taping, that her grandmother used to look at old photographs of strangers in antique shops sometimes, lingering a little too long, and when asked why, would only say, "Just looking for something familiar, I suppose," and change the subject. And then a detail nobody expected surfaced during a routine background interview conducted 11 days before the taping. A young researcher assigned to prep Odessa's segment noticed, while reviewing an old family document Odessa's granddaughter had provided for context, a maiden name on an adoption paper that matched, almost exactly, a name flagged in an unrelated production file for Ruth's segment scheduled the same day. The researcher, unsure if it meant anything at all, brought it to a supervising producer, who made a single phone call to a genealogist the network occasionally consulted for exactly this kind of long-shot possibility. The DNA sample came back 9 days later, the morning of the taping, 40 minutes before the cameras started rolling. Only 3 people in the building knew the result before the show began. Marcus Steele was one of them. But the real story hadn't even started yet. Odessa finished her small segment, was thanked, and was being led off stage when Marcus, holding a card he had been handed only minutes earlier by a producer whose hands, witnesses said, were visibly shaking, asked her to wait one more moment. "Miss Marsh," he said, "before you go, I want to bring out our next guest a little early, if that's all right with you. I think you two might have something in common." Ruth Calloway walked out from the wings in her own good dress, a soft lavender one her daughter had helped her choose that morning, completely unaware of anything except that she was about to answer the same friendly questions Odessa had just finished answering. The 2 women looked at each other from 20 feet apart for a long moment. Neither reacted at first, the way strangers politely acknowledge each other before an introduction. Marcus watched them both, his own hands gripping the small card a little too tightly. "Ruth," Marcus said carefully, "tell everyone what you told our team a few weeks ago about a habit you have every morning." Ruth blinked, a little confused by the specificity of the question, but answered honestly, "I hum a little tune every morning at 7 o'clock. Have my whole life. I couldn't tell you where it comes from." "Would you hum it for us now?" Marcus asked. Ruth, a little embarrassed, hummed 4 soft bars in front of the studio audience. Odessa Marsh, 83 years old, 20 feet away, made a sound that was not quite a gasp and not quite a sob, and began humming the exact same 4 bars in the exact same key, at the exact same moment Ruth finished hers. The studio fell completely silent. Not one person in that room moved for nearly 5 full seconds. Even the crew members, headset cables in hand, mid-motion adjusting a camera angle, simply stopped. Marcus Steele took off his glasses. He didn't put them back on right away. "Ladies," he said, and had to stop, clear his throat, and start again. "I have something to tell you both, and I need you to know we only confirmed this 40 minutes ago, and I have never in 11 years of hosting this show had to say what I'm about to say." He wasn't finished. "You are sisters," Marcus said. "Twins, born the same day, in the same county, in Mississippi, 83 years ago. A hospital error separated you at birth. One of you was told the other had died. Neither of you ever knew the other one existed. Until right now." Ruth's hand flew to her mouth. Odessa did not move for a long moment, staring at a woman she had never seen before in her life, who nonetheless had her own mother's exact eyebrows, her own late husband's observation about that same tilt of the head, features her own grandchildren would recognize instantly the moment they saw the two women side by side. "My sister didn't die," Odessa finally said, so quietly the boom mic barely caught it, and then again, louder, disbelieving, "She didn't die." Ruth crossed the stage first, moving faster than an 83-year-old woman with a hip replacement had any business moving, and the two sisters, who had hummed the same 4 bars in 2 different states for 60 consecutive years, without ever knowing why, held on to each other in front of 300 strangers who had come that day expecting nothing more than a game show. Marcus Steele walked away from the podium and stood with his back to the cameras for several seconds, his shoulders visibly moving, before a producer quietly handed him a handkerchief he pressed to his face, without shame. "Let me tell you something," he said. Once he turned back around, his voice still unsteady. "I grew up not knowing half of my own family's story either. There's a hole in you when you don't know where you come from, even if you can't name the hole. I understand a piece of what these two women are feeling today, because some version of that not knowing lives in a lot of us. But what I'm looking at right now, 60 years of two women humming the same song to nobody, waiting for somebody to finally sing it back, that's something else entirely." But Marcus wasn't done. He pulled out his phone in front of the entire studio. "I want everyone watching at home to see this," he said, "because I'm calling my own foundation's genealogy fund right now on this stage, and I am personally covering full retroactive record correction and any legal costs these two families need to formally reunite their family trees. Today, out loud, so nobody thinks this kind of thing only happens on television and then quietly disappears once the cameras stop." Both families in the audience, the two competing teams originally there to play the game that day, stood and applauded through their own tears, one father shouting out, unprompted, "Give them the whole hour, we don't need to play today," a sentiment Marcus honored on the spot. The episode aired 5 weeks later and crossed 310 million views within the month, trending under the hashtag 60 years of the same song. 3 months after the taping, Odessa and Ruth spent their first Thanksgiving together, splitting the holiday between Biloxi and Spokane the following 2 years. A year after the taping, their combined families, nearly 40 people between them, children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, who had grown up believing they had no cousins on that side of the family at all, held a joint reunion in Mississippi at the site of the maternity home, now a small community center, where a plaque now hangs commemorating the Marsh Calloway reunion, funded by Marcus Steele's foundation, along with a modest scholarship fund for descendants of families separated by the same wave of post-war record errors. Today, Odessa and Ruth speak by phone every morning at 7 o'clock and hum their 4 bars together, finally, at the same time, on purpose. Marcus Steele, asked in a later interview what moved him most, said simply, it wasn't the DNA test. It was watching 2 women who'd spent 60 years grieving somebody they didn't even know they'd lost, finally get to stop grieving, together, on the same porch, at the same hour, for the rest of their lives. If this incredible story of two sisters separated for 60 years touched your heart, subscribe to this channel and hit the like button. Share this with someone who believes it is never too late to find your family or your way home. Have you ever discovered something about your own family history that changed everything? Let us know in the comments below. Because, as Odessa and Ruth proved, some bonds survive even when the whole world forgets they exist.